Now let's talk about the final stages of World War II in Europe, and then we'll talk about what happens with the war against Japan. Okay, so Germany had gained control over parts of northern Africa prior to the war kicking off. And the Allied forces decided that that would be the best place to start. So you're going to have a concentrated Allied force focusing on defeating German forces in North Africa before they commit to an all-out war in Europe itself. Okay, so by 1943, the Allies are going to be successful in defeating German forces in North Africa, and then they begin to focus their sights on Italy. Okay, and this is where U.S. forces are going to get more involved in the war in Europe. Before this, U.S. forces were heavily more involved in the Pacific against Japan. Okay. So let's talk about the invasion of Italy. 1943, you have American forces and other Allied forces invading Italy, and the Italian people at the same time are going to remove Benito Mussolini from power, right? And he even gets publicly executed later on. But it's not over. The Allies don't have control of Italy just yet. German forces are going to take control of the country, and they're going to be battling it out with Allied forces all the way until 1944, when they finally surrender. Okay, the German forces in Italy, that is. Okay, next you're going to have a major campaign taking place in France, Normandy, France. Okay, and this is D-Day. Okay, one of the big battles of the war. It takes place on June 6, 1944. All right, so you're going to have Allied forces landing on the beach at Normandy. This is in France. They're going to be pushing back German forces, and eventually they gain control of Paris. Okay, and after a temporary counterattack by German forces, the Allies are going to start pushing German forces back, and they're going to enter into Germany, making their way to Berlin. Okay, so yes, you have Allied forces coming in from France and making their way towards Berlin, eventually making their way into Germany after heavy fighting against German forces. That's on the Western Front. Then at the same time, on the Eastern Front, you have forces of the Soviet Union invading into Germany as well. So the idea is to basically come at Berlin from the east and from the west and surround them and pretty much end the war. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on the Eastern Front. So as I mentioned before, Germany had invaded the Soviet Union, but they were not successful in taking over the country because you have Russian troops who are heavily armed with weapons coming from the United States, and they're eventually going to defeat German forces at Stalingrad. Okay, Stalingrad is one of the major cities in the Soviet Union at the time. And the weather plays a part in this as well, because it's extremely cold in the Soviet Union at this time. Right? And when German forces started the invasion, it was in summertime, and they thought it was going to be a blitzkrieg attack, right? Lightning fast and get it over and done with really quick. Boom, there goes the Soviet Union. But it didn't happen that way. It took a really long time. And so it goes from summer to winter, and it starts getting extremely cold, right? And this helps to weaken the German troops and their motivation, because they only brought enough clothes for a summer campaign. They didn't bring a bunch of heavy jackets, right? So they're freezing, right? And it becomes this prolonged battle, okay? And so eventually Russian troops are able to defeat German forces in the area of the Soviet Union. And so the German army is forced to retreat. Millions died. Many died just from the cold during the long retreat back to Germany. Okay, so yeah, you got like 10 million people that died in that failed campaign, and that was a major blow to Germany. Okay, that's one of the reasons why ultimately they failed in World War II. Okay, so now as you have Russian troops invading Germany from the east, they begin pushing deeper and deeper into the country, and they make their way to Berlin before the Allies make it on the Western Front. And so you have Russian troops attacking, and Adolf Hitler at the time is locked down in an underground bunker, and he sees that pretty much it's over. And so he commits suicide, and then a few days later, the German government is going to officially surrender to the Allies on May 2nd, 1945, bringing the end to the war in Europe.